In almost every organization I work with, by the time leadership is ready to call on someone like me, the structural problem has been visible for a long time. Not to everyone, but to someone, usually to more than one person. The finance lead has been watching it in the numbers, in rework costs, unexplained variance, the slow accumulation of small exceptions that do not look like a pattern until you add them up. She's mentioned it. She's been told she's being negative, or that she does not understand the operational side, or that the numbers will correct once the team gets up to speed. The HR lead has been absorbing it in her office in the same conversations she's been having with different people about the same issues. A personality conflict that, on closer look, is two people in roles with no clear boundary between them. A performance problem that, on closer look, is a capable person receiving contradictory direction from two different leaders and improvising to survive the day. The supervisor has been living inside it, told one thing by one leader, another thing by a second, with no standard to choose between them and no safe way to ask which one is right. These people are not being difficult. They're not being negative. They're not failing to see the big picture. They're early, and no one is listening to them. This video is about what they are seeing, why it is structural, and what changes when the organization finally names the source. The finance lead sees structural drift before anyone else, not emotionally, but mathematically. Here's what that looks like in practice. Rework costs that do not have a clear owner, a job that was done once, then redone, then adjusted again. And no one can explain why the first version was not right because there's no documented standard for what right looks like. The cost shows up in numbers. The cause does not show up in any conversation. Unexplained variance in margins, a product or service line that should be profitable but is not. And the explanation keeps changing. The wrong client, the wrong timing, the wrong team member. But the variance is consistent across clients, timing, and team members, which means the explanation is wrong. The variance is structural. Small exceptions that compound. A discount approved outside of normal process. A scope change absorbed without a change order. A delivery made at cost to preserve a relationship. Each one is defensible in isolation. Together, they represent a pattern of structural ambiguity. No clear rights around pricing, scope, or client commitments. That is slowly compressing the margin. The finance lead is not being negative when she names these things. She's being precise. The numbers are already agreeing with her before the conversation does. What she needs is not to be told to trust the process. She needs the organization to understand that the numbers she's seeing are not a finance problem. They are a structural signal, and they will keep compounding until the structural source is addressed. The HR lead is in the place where unresolved structural ambiguity comes to die. I want to say that plainly because it is one of the most accurate descriptions of what the HR function becomes in an organization without clear structural architecture. When roles blur, when two people are both responsible for the same outcome without a clear definition of who owns what, they collide. That collision arrives in the HR lead's office dressed up as personality conflict. Two people who do not get along, two people with different communication styles, two people who need to learn to work together. And the HR lead is expected to mediate, coach, and resolve it. But the conflict is not about the people, it's about the structure. Two people with overlapping, undefined roles will always produce friction, not because of who they are, but because the design guarantees it. You could replace both of them, and the new people will produce the same friction in the same roles because their roles were never designed to coexist without collision. When priorities shift without explanation, when the vision changes direction and the change travels down through the organization, without being translated into what it means for each role. People stop executing and start guessing. That uncertainty produces anxiety, conflict, and disengagement. It arrives in HR as a moral problem, a retention problem, a culture problem. It is a structural problem wearing a human face. The HR lead is exhausted not because her job is hard. She's exhausted because she is the cleanup crew for problems that started upstream, and the upstream source is never addressed. She resolves the conflict. The structural conditions that produced it remain. 6 months later, the same conversation happens with different people. She already knows the source. She just has not been given the language to name it structurally or the authority to address it at the level where it actually lives. The supervisor is the person closest to the work and the person most directly exposed to the consequences of missing architecture. Here's a specific pattern I see most often. 2 supervisors, same policy. 2 different ways of enforcing it. Before you have the performance conversation with either of them, consider what is actually happening. They are not failing to cooperate. They are not being difficult. They are seeing the situation differently under pressure, and no one has aligned what right looks like between them. When there's no documented standard for how a policy is applied, each supervisor applies it through the lens of their own judgment, their own experience, and the direction they most recently received from the leader. If 2 leaders above them have given different signals, even subtly, even unintentionally, 2 supervisors will enforce the same policy 2 different ways, every time. This is not a supervision problem. That is a standard problem, and a standard problem is a structural problem. The supervisor who is improvising is not undertrained. She is unsupported. She is doing math without a fixed denominator, making judgment calls in the absence of a shared standard, because no shared standard has been designed and documented. What looks like a performance gap in this layer is almost always a load failure. Capable people carrying weight that the structure should have been designed to carry. And the weight shows up as inconsistency, conflict, and the quiet exhaustion of people who are working hard and still feel like they're failing. So why? If these people already know, does the organization keep not hearing them? There are 3 reasons, and they are all structural. First, the signals are misread. The finance lead's variance report is read as a finance concern, not a structural signal. The HR lead's conflict mediation is read as a people problem, not a structural symptom. The supervisor's inconsistency is read as a performance gap, not as a load failure. The signal is present. The framework for reading it correctly is not. Second, the messenger is discredited. The finance lead is seen as negative. The HR lead is seen as soft. The supervisor is seen as not ready for more responsibility. The person who is early is treated as the problem because the organization does not yet have a way to hear what they're saying as structural information rather than personal complaint. Third, the fix is aimed at the symptom. The organization responds to the conflict, the variance, the inconsistency, not the structural condition producing them. The conflict is mediated. The variance is explained away. The supervisor is coached. The structural conditions remain. The signals come back. This is not malice. It is the absence of a diagnostic framework that reads organizational signals at the level where they actually originate. When a structural source is named, When the organization finally understands what the finance lead's numbers, the HR lead's caseload, and the supervisor's inconsistency are all symptoms of the same missing architecture, something shifts. The finance lead stops being negative. She becomes an internal ally, the person whose numbers already confirm the structural diagnosis before the conversation does. Her early read becomes an asset rather than a friction point. The HR lead stops being the cleanup crew. She becomes the person who can identify structural ambiguity by its symptoms and escalate it to the right level rather than absorbing it personally. Her caseload becomes a diagnostic tool rather than a burden. The supervisor stops improvising. She becomes the person who enforces a standard that has been designed and documented, and who escalates when the standard is unclear, rather than guessing and absorbing the consequences of guessing wrong. None of this requires replacing anyone. It requires building the architecture that lets these people do the job they were actually hired to do, rather than compensating for the jobs the structure was never designed to do. That architecture can be built, and the people who will benefit most from it are already in your building, waiting for someone to listen to what they have been trying to say. If you want to understand what that work looks like in your specific organization, the starting point is a structural clarity conversation at foundationsbc.com/FOA. The link is in the description. The first conversation is free. They already know. The question is whether the organization is finally ready to hear them. That structure can be built.